Hi, good morning. My name is Mark Quickle. I'm the Technical Practice Manager for SharePoint and for our Azure development business here at Planet Technologies. I want to thank everyone for coming out to the webcast today. We have a lot to show and to discuss today. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment because I think it's important to understand kind of who Planet is. And we are a 20-year-old IT services firm. We're based out of Germantown, Maryland. We have north of 170 consultants, and we're 100% Microsoft focused. We are one of the highest awarded partners in the public sector, and we're certainly also one of the highest awarded partners in the state and local government sector as well. Most notably, if you look at the slide here, you can see that Microsoft has awarded us 4 times consecutively the State and Local Government Cloud Partner of the Year award. That award has only been awarded 4 times, and we've been fortunate enough to win it all 4 times. Next, I'd like to introduce our panel. As I mentioned, I am the Technical Practice Manager, and I have the luxury of being in the company of Dean Morgan. He is a senior SharePoint architect with the team here. We also have Jed Curl on the line. He is a senior consultant also on our SharePoint team. And Larry Cage is one of our senior developers who is focused on Azure and SharePoint development technologies. So our webcast today is focused on Flow and PowerApps, and we wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you to the topic. If you haven't yet had the opportunity to see it, I think it will be a really good eye-opener. We are going to be doing a demo as part of our webinar today. That will be towards the tail end, and we'll also be opening the webinar up for questions through the GoToWebinar window, so feel free to pop questions in there as you have them. If we have time, we'll try to address them, and if we do not have time, we will be following up with you individually on your questions as well. So we're going to start with just an overview of PowerApps and Flow, kind of what they are, and what the story is as far as evolution of other products. We'll be getting into the creation and sharing of apps as we get into the demo. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been discussing with our customers, and then of course we'll do the demo. Dean Morgan, would you like to get us started today with an overview?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I'd like to spend a few minutes to set the context of what forms and workflow are. So if you've ever filled out a form at the doctor's office, then you know what a form is. In the context of electronic forms, they can be as simple as a few text boxes or as complex as a dynamic input that changes with the data that the user puts into the form. Forms gather the data from the user and workflow acts on that data. As an example, you've probably sent an email to your boss and asked for vacation time, and he approved. This can be thought of as a simple workflow. We had input, your request, and output, your boss's approval, and then he sends you back an email to let you know it's been approved. Now, workflow products like Flow and SharePoint Designer workflows take the data the user inputs, your request, from a form or from a list, and then execute the steps, the approval, that you set up in the program. They can be as simple as vacation approval that we just talked about, or they can be very complex, spanning multiple systems.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of technical workloads there, so let's just kind of dive into this a bit further. Let's start with form creation. So I'm sure most of our audience is familiar with InfoPath, which has really been around since Office 2003. And it's matured a lot over the last couple of years, the last couple of iterations. And then Microsoft also offers a number of different form solutions for IT professionals and information workers alike. In your mind, how does PowerApps differ from what we've traditionally seen?
PowerApps is like InfoPath in that it allows you to create the forms you need for user input, but it goes well beyond what InfoPath is capable of doing. PowerApps opens up the ability to connect from a mobile device for input into SharePoint, SQL, or a large number of different destinations. And keep in mind that PowerApps is not specific to SharePoint. It can be used as input to other systems without even interacting with SharePoint at all. So PowerApps is the forms engine of choice moving forward with Microsoft. One of the prime reasons for this is to enable a modern mobile experience, which is something that InfoPath just simply could not do. And PowerApps enables us to surface data from a huge assortment of data sources, and things are only getting started with this product. I want to mention Microsoft Forms here, as there's some confusion over this product in comparison to PowerApps. Microsoft Forms is primarily focused on education and is a replacement for surveys, not necessarily for forms. So once again, the Microsoft naming department has confused the situation.
Yeah, isn't that true? This is Jed. Dean, I was going to jump in and just piggyback off what you were saying there in terms of some of the PowerApps capabilities and how it compares a little bit to InfoPath, because really InfoPath has had some, because it's been around so long, it really hasn't been updated over the more recent past to be mobile friendly. And so PowerApps has made a huge leap forward in terms of the user experience and being able to deliver that experience on mobile devices, whether it's a phone or a tablet. And you do have to, when you're building PowerApp, you have to pick kind of your target device, whether it's more the small format of a phone or a larger format like a tablet or something that would be used in the browser. But it really has the goal of being mobile friendly from the start. And it can take advantage of other capabilities that, like the phone particularly has, of its camera or location services. And what's great is that you don't have to do anything with that. It's just those services are available and as you're building the app. The other mobile compatible capabilities that have is being able to work in an offline mode. That was never anything that InfoPath was ever able to do, or even to detect if the connection that the device that you're on is a metered connection, so you can detect that from within PowerApp. So that on top of the fact that PowerApps can run on iOS, Android, Windows, mobile platforms, and all your major browsers, but you only have to build, or have someone build for you one app, and then it works on all of those. And to be honest, I almost didn't even think this would be possible, right? And I've been a little bit skeptical as it's been rolled out by Microsoft and gradually adding more features and capabilities, but Microsoft's really pulling it off with this one.
Yeah, I agree. Now you mentioned a few of the Microsoft-specific applications, right? InfoPath and Forms. What considerations, Dean and Jed, specifically, are you guys taking with your customers as it relates to PowerApps and some of the third-party, off-the-shelf products that are available? Once we consider, cost, interoperability, complexity, deployment, those types of things. And then, Larry, if you might weigh in as it relates to custom dev versus, say, using PowerApps.
Good questions, Mark. The off-the-shelf applications that might be seen as competitors to Flow and to PowerApps, like K2, Nintex, and AgilePoint, are really complementary to the product. As a general rule, most third-party workflow purchases, they bundle together the forms engine with the workflow. So if the use case is that you need a standalone form, then you probably would not want to buy a workflow bundle just to get the forms engine. In that use case, PowerApps would then be the preferred forms option.
Yeah, I'll add to that that those other products, those other third-party solutions, you know, a lot of them, they've been around for quite a while, and that's a good thing in the sense that they do have a fairly rich feature set. But I've also, you know, with the experience I've had and heard from others as well, that the kind of the flip side of that is the level of complexity and the steeper learning curve that comes with those to become proficient at using those is something really to take into consideration when you're making a decision on whether or not to invest in those other products, and especially since there's, you know, costs involved with those. But one recommendation I would kind of throw out there, if you're in a situation within your organization where you haven't made an investment in a third-party product, and now with PowerApps on the scene, you know, looking at that, it really is important to have a pretty good understanding and of what your forms and workflow needs are before making a decision about which option to go through. And I think that's probably why most of you are in this conversation here today, is find out, you know, what some of those capabilities are with the PowerApps and Flow side of things. But really understanding what your business needs for your specific forms, for your specific workflows, what systems does it need to connect to, what things does it need to be able to respond to, how do people need to use it. Those are things that really you need to understand those, and then compare those against, you know, with information that you can find about each of the technologies that you're looking or considering to solve those needs.
Now, Mark, to the custom dev part of your question, PowerApps is really geared towards individuals who'd like to build out quick standalone applications to just basically interact with data. You know, it's a nice drag-and-drop UI interface with some Excel-like expression built in for logic and data. And as Jed mentioned earlier, you can use device features. If you're on a mobile device, you can use the camera or any of the native functionality. To the bit about data, PowerApps has many out-of-the-box data connectors, from Google to Facebook to Excel worksheets. With a few clicks and basic form information, you can have an application built and running in your browser or mobile devices. SharePoint framework, it's page and web part. You get full support for client-side SharePoint development and ability to develop responsive HTML design. SharePoint framework allows you to choose development tools that you're comfortable with. Choose a Windows IDE like Visual Studio Code, or choose from a number of cross-platform products.
Yeah, thanks. I think you guys mentioned a few things we'll see in the demo coming up, so we'll certainly look for that. And Larry, kind of, you know, to your point, I know one of the big questions that kind of has come up, you know, in engagements where I've been out talking with the customer is, when should I use PowerApps, or when should I, you know, go with a custom dev solution? And I don't know that conversation is like a new conversation specifically for PowerApps. I mean, I remember as a developer multiple times going down the path of starting a project in InfoPath and then switching that over to a SharePoint object model or web development project, because as we started down the path, it became quickly aware to us that InfoPath maybe wasn't the right tool. It was to get to the user experience requirements that might be there, or the functional requirements, there would be a lot of extra development that would have to happen. And so I think really the driver is the development and maintenance costs. So if people ask me that question, you know, I simply say, okay, well, what are your functional requirements? What are your user experience requirements? Let's take a few minutes to wireframe this out in PowerApps so we can figure out what that's going to look like. If that's greatly achievable, with little compromise, and we can develop it faster there, then why not go that route, right? In the end, it's going to be cheaper to develop up front because a lot of your tooling is already in place, and it's going to be certainly cheaper to maintain over time, and it's, you know, a product that's fully supported by Microsoft. But, you know, I know even we've had some projects that we've worked on internally here or with other customers where we've looked at it and we've said, you know what, there's a lot of maybe modal dialog windows, or the user interface requirements are just too responsive that they're not going to work very, very well in PowerApps. And then, you know, in order to get that to work, we're going to have to sort of refactor a bunch of things. Then it might actually be cheaper and more cost-effective to go with like HTML5 and TypeScript and do something in SharePoint Framework, or even, you know, a quick Azure website or something like that that uses the SharePoint APIs to speak directly to SharePoint. Let's move on from PowerApps just quickly and talk about Flow for a moment. So Dean mentioned that, you know, PowerApps was kind of the form product of choice by Microsoft. Similarly, would you say that Flow is the workflow product of choice by Microsoft?
Yeah, Mark, I would agree with that statement. Flow is a cloud-based workflow product that interacts with SharePoint and many other cloud-based systems. In addition, Flow can interact with on-premise systems through the use of a data management gateway. Flow allows you to set up the actions and conditions that you then provide the outcome to your business process. To go back to our discussion on the vacation approval I was talking about earlier, the condition might be, do you have enough vacation time? And this is something that would need to be validated before the request is approved by your boss after you send them an email or through a workflow process. If there's not enough vacation time left, then the action of rejection occurs. And in Flow, we set up the conditions and different actions based on the outcome of each of these conditions. So Flow allows non-programmers to set up complex interactions based on business processes requirements.
Yeah, and just to compare that with what some of you on this webinar might be familiar with on Microsoft product of SharePoint Designer workflows, kind of comparing the two. I mean, the bottom line is most workflow-based products or, you know, services have three things in common, right? They're all initiated by some kind of an event, and then they perform certain actions, and there's, you know, conditional, some logic that can be applied to determine which actions to take. But then they also have the ability to retrieve and update data, right? They can interact with other data sources. So SharePoint Designer, you know, like InfoPad, has been around for quite a while. But when compared to Microsoft Flow and the basis of those kind of three general functional areas of a workflow product, Flow has significantly more options. Microsoft's really put a lot of investment in this. On the SharePoint Designer workflow side, the main way, or the only ways to really get those workflows to start is, you know, it's tied to a SharePoint list item or document, you know, like whether the item's being created or updated. You can manually start the workflows, a SharePoint Designer workflow, and then one workflow can trigger another. But with Flow, there's so many other things that can actually trigger a flow to arrive, whether it's an email arriving in your mailbox, a file getting created in OneDrive for Business, or even Dropbox. And it triggers from Dynamics 365 when a record is created or modified or deleted, or even a blob is added to a blob storage. And that's just to name a few, right? There's so many different ones. So on the side of the actions that the Microsoft Flows can perform, they're also much more extensive than just what you get with the SharePoint Designer workflows. So Flows can create context in Outlook, can create files in OneDrive, it can add, modify content in SharePoint, and that has obviously in common with SharePoint Designer workflows, but it can post a tweet. It can send a push notification to your PowerApps app on a mobile device. It can even create a user in Azure AD. So it's pretty extensive is the bottom line, and Microsoft offers a number of different starting points when you're creating flows. You can start from a clean slate of nothing, but there's also a lot of templates that Microsoft offers to kind of help you get started, or maybe a lot of the templates have a specific function or intent behind it that matches with what you're looking to start from, and maybe not even have to modify that much at all. I will point out that the one thing that's missing so far in Flow that is available in SharePoint Designer workflows is that Flow can't change lists and document item permissions. So I've heard that it's coming. It was discussed quite a bit at Ignite this year, but I still haven't heard any kind of time frame for when that's going to be. So that's one that is a common one. I've built many SharePoint Designer workflows and needed that ability to kind of break those inheritance of permissions on those objects, and it's not quite there yet with Flow, but hopefully soon. And then on the data connection side, I think one of the early slides we had a list of all these icons of different services, both Microsoft and non-Microsoft cloud services that Flow is just natively built to interact with, to connect to and perform certain functions or get certain data or do certain actions. So that's pretty awesome. Plus you can create your own, even though it's not necessarily a trivial undertaking, but it is a great option that you can, if there's something out there, you can build your own as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that in just a second, a little more in detail. But I know for one of the things that's kind of exciting for me, coming from SharePoint Designer, because you mentioned SharePoint Designer a few times in there, to Flow is just the simplicity of the tooling. And sometimes with simplicity, there's some things that maybe are potentially not there. But I think for the most part, it really works to the betterment of the product. When you are using Flow, right, you don't have to have SharePoint Designer on your machine. And as a developer who's worked in the past with SharePoint Designer workflows, you run into issues maybe where there's some issues with the cache on the machine or other types of challenges getting connected or whatever it may be. And you also want to make sure you have the latest updates and that type of thing. It just you don't have to deal with a client application, and to me that means the speed to delivery is even faster, right? And there's less complexity, less client issues maybe to have to deal with. So to me that that kind of is just the definition that Flow is really a cloud-first model, as is PowerApps. Since we're talking about tooling, and since you mentioned it, this extensibility story with Flow is quite a bit different as well than the custom actions that we saw using SharePoint Designer. So, Larry, would you want to talk about that maybe a little?
Sure. As we know, for SharePoint Designer, you really have the workflow actions which historically be created by your organization using Visual Studio. Essentially, you would have to install Visual Studio and the appropriate SharePoint tooling on your SharePoint box. You would then need to develop the custom action, package it up as a form or a sandbox solution. The solution would be deployed to a farm by an administrator and activated. It would then be available to SharePoint Designer. But those weren't particularly cloud-friendly since Microsoft deprecated farm-level and sandbox solutions in Office 365. As a common practice for us would be to take advantage of the SharePoint Designer action to call a REST endpoint and to do some processing there. But It was that wasn't really super intuitive, wasn't very friendly to use. But in Flow, you can also call REST endpoints as an action point, and you can extend workflow actions using the OpenAPI standard. So if you in Flow were looking at the connectors and you didn't see something there, or you simply want to write a connector to a specific internal web API that your organization has published, you can specify an Open API or Swagger file that defines the API and any authentication. Publish it for consumption. This can be done in Visual Studio Code, Notepad, really any text editor. Bearing in mind the flow isn't necessarily just for Office 365. It's possible to embed your flow into your organization's MVC applications, for example, and create simple application workflows.
Now, Larry, you and I, we had the luxury of working with Azure Logic Apps, sort of the Flow counterpart, on this ahead of Flow being introduced. And Microsoft, had kind of built that almost as a precursor to Flow, and then Flow's built on that platform. So when you're talking with customers, specifically in the Azure space, how do you determine for them when Flow is appropriate, or when to use Logic Apps, or even go to maybe a more code-centric level business process automation tool, something like Azure Functions?
Well, Flow, just at the higher level, Flow is intended for your non-developers, your business users, your power users, people who really enjoy just getting in there and playing with some of the data. You can send us SMS when you get emails from important inboxes. Send email notifications when data in an Excel spreadsheet hits predefined milestones. Whereas Flow is geared more towards your power user, your Logic Apps, is DevOps. So with Logic Apps, you get into business operations that would be critical processes for your organization, sending data to partners in real-time requests, ingesting data from B2B operations, any number of activities similar to that. Azure Functions are for your developers and is really code agnostic. You can choose to develop in Perl or C#, or even if a particular coding language you prefer doesn't happen to be implemented, you could add it. Not to mention that Azure Functions are serverless. So really the decisions as to which is best is generally decided by the complexity of the questions being asked. The need to maintain or spend money on additional hardware. There are a lot of options and many ways to go.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I agree with that. Let's talk about customer adoption for a moment, just before we jump into the demo here. So we're using Flow and PowerApps internally here at Planet, right? We're Office 365 users, we're Azure users, right? We kind of since we are 100% Microsoft focused, we are constantly using their tools, and we have built a couple of apps here specifically around the customer engagement and delivery that kind of ties PowerApps directly into Dynamics and into SharePoint. Now, in some cases, we have found we can write, forms that our consultants can use while they're on the field talking with customers, and they can put that information into Dynamics or into SharePoint, and like we've written those apps actually very, very quickly. I mean, we're talking a couple of days to put together a full app from beginning to end. In some cases, we've found maybe there were some deeper complexities that we end up using, like the object model, maybe connect Dynamics and SharePoint together, something like that. But for the most part, I would say like we have found success using PowerApps from a forms perspective to work really well in a lot of scenarios. As it relates specifically to Flow, I'm thinking about one particular success story that I encountered where I was speaking with a customer, and they had a public-facing website, and they had Twitter and Facebook and a few other social media accounts, and they also had an intranet that was built on SharePoint Online, and they wanted to be able to sort of federate that information between the systems, because what they would do is somebody would, for example, go into SharePoint Online, they would put some calendar events in for internal knowledge, and they wanted to, whenever the calendar items reached a certain period, they want to publish those to social media. And it's amazing how quickly you can take that SharePoint data based on status change or date trigger or whatever you may want it to be, and then publish that out to sort of social media accounts. So that was kind of one of the things that stood out for me as we were sort of preparing for this, that I wanted to bring up. Now, if you guys would just take a moment as well and just share any maybe scenarios or things or conversation points that you've run into with customers, that would be really great.
Yeah, so I'll dive in then with this one. I'm working with one organization that's has a fleet of vehicles, and they have one group of within their organization that's more on the maintenance side and needs to be able to track what maintenance activities have been performed on their vehicles, and then also schedule and kind of plan for the routine maintenance. But then some of the vehicles that they manage, not all of them, but some of them are available for staff to reserve. So this kind of situation that they have is really actually a great scenario for the PowerApps and Flow story, and being able to tie that with the data just managed within SharePoint lists. So what we've got is a vehicle reservation Power App that is available to all the staff, and they can go onto that app and be able to create new reservations for a vehicle, as well as view their current and past reservations if they want. But they can set the date and time where they want to pick it up, set some criteria for the kind of vehicle that they're looking for. And the Power App can use their GPS location to even pick which of the locations they have available to reserve, because the vehicles are kept in a few different places. So it's going to use that capability from the device. Once they submit the reservation using that app, that's going to trigger a flow that's then going to notify the transportation staff that actually would go in to a separate Power App for managing the reservations, and allow them to select based on the schedule and availability of the vehicles, as well as the class or the kind of vehicle that the person that made the request is looking for, and then go ahead and assign the vehicle. And then the flows can then also be, well, they'll also send email notifications as reminders before the vehicle is scheduled to be picked up to the person that requested it. And then when it's about to be due, they can get another notification that, hey, your reservation, your car that you've checked out is due back. So that's kind of the reservation app end of the solution, with two different Power Apps for two different audiences. A third Power App would actually be built for the kind of the maintenance department and those who manage the whole inventory of their vehicles. So this app would give them the ability to look at all the statistics, all the specifications around each vehicle, be able to schedule the maintenance, and log what maintenance has been performed on that vehicle. And the reason to split this solution out into multiple Power Apps, separate Power Apps, is because one of the things that you'll find building Power Apps is that it isn't doesn't have the best story, I guess, to put it frankly, around altering what the UI is based on who's logged in. So more like a roles-based. It's not. It doesn't have a great strength for that scenario. So splitting the apps essentially based on kind of role or certain group of functions is just a better way of utilizing that app. And then you can, set up permissions around each of those apps and decide which users or groups of users are able to use which of those apps. Plus, this also gives you the ability to keep the UI much simpler and user-friendly, but also easier to kind of create and maintain and iterate over time changes to each of those apps, because the functionality is kind of divided. So that's one situation that I've been working with that I thought kind of would present an interesting use case for the PowerApps and Flow story.
Jed, that's a great use case. Really appreciate that. As another example, I have a client that has a need to capture expense items in a real-time scenario. Those expense items are from field employees in order to have visibility to the data as it occurs. And in another example, a client had a business requirement to upload emailed resumes into a document library. Not sure that you're aware of it or not, but the email-enabled document libraries are not supported in SharePoint Online, and so they wanted to run review and approval workflows on them after they're submitted to the document library. So we worked with Flow to enable email submission to the document library and set up additional flows to do the approval process. I'll show you one of the document library submittal email workflow in just a few minutes. The combination of PowerApps and Flow make this a very powerful and flexible solution.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. Just a real quick note, we do see some questions coming in the dialogue window. We do plan to address those at the end as we have time, so please bear with us on that. Just real quickly, and then we're going to jump into the demo. I would say that if our customers are thinking kind of next steps, they're maybe interested in some of this stuff. PowerApps and Flow kind of has, in my opinion, one of the lowest barriers of entry than any of the other competing products that we've seen today, right? As we talked about before, you don't need to have a client application installed. And if you have Office 365 already, you essentially have access to the product as long as you are licensed for it. And if you want to build flows or Power Apps outside of Office 365, well, you can also go out and sign up for a 90-day trial of Power Apps Plan 2 and get that product separately as well and see how you like it, see if it fits your need. So I think, essentially you go to the website, sign up, and go. The one thing to keep in mind, there is no migration path for InfoPath to Power Apps directly. So there's not a tool available that somebody can go and just kind of convert. In fact, if you watch the Ignite videos or anything coming out from Microsoft on this, they've stated explicitly they're not necessarily looking for feature parity between the existing SharePoint centric products and these newer ones, kind of for better or for worse. So the guidance on this is to sort of reimagine what you're doing now and how you might redo that in Power Apps or Flow. And so, like, when we get involved with customers on this, we have a couple of different things. In some cases, we go and we talk with customers, right? We might go and build n number of Power Apps or Flows. In other cases, right, we just want to make sure that we're kind of going in there and sort of educating the customer. Jen and I were talking about this briefly because the question was, how do we focus this to our customers? In some cases, they're going to have people who are, generally, they're your power users of SharePoint, maybe Excel and Word, and they're very good with Office. Those folks should be able to pick up Flow and Power Apps fairly easily with a little guidance. So in those cases, we're going in a lot of times just sort of doing a workshop with them, training them on it, and then helping them maybe get some of their first things built. In some cases, you know, there might not be somebody in your organization that does that, and so that might be in a historical case, right? We might have to say, oh, you want a custom form maybe at your front desk when people come to register or sign in at your location or whatever that may be. That might have been a custom dev solution in the past that we can now take advantage of Power Apps, and so we can, while maybe, you know, us as a consultant are actually doing the work, we can actually do that work cheaper and faster because we have these tools available to us. I guess at this point, let's maybe move on from the dialogue a little bit and go to the demo. Dean, do you mind kicking that off?
Be glad to, Mark. I'll start off with creating a template app to show how easy it is to create your first app. Just keep in mind that the demo gremlins are always around, so please bear with us. So I'm going to switch over to my PowerApps web area, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to create. And as you can see, I've already created a few apps here. I'm going to create an app, and then we're going to show it to you on a phone. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the creation of a new app, and as you can see, we have a canvas or a blank canvas or a template here. We're going to select the phone layout, and we're going to select Service Desk. And as you'll notice, there are a number of different, right now it's going to be putting this into Google Drive, but there are a number of different connections that we could connect to for different for data. As you can see, there are a lot of different data sources that it can use. Now, the reason that this is using, it can use Google Drive or it can use OneDrive. The reason it's using that is it is based on an Excel spreadsheet in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and use this, and as you can see, it's creating my app. And with any luck, we'll actually be able to see it or see something similar to it on the phone in just a moment. And when you create these applications, you can change the data sources or the data connections within the app. And as you'll see when it comes up, it will allow you to change those data sources and so forth. So it's now created this app. The one thing that we need to do in order to see it in the cloud, however, is we need to save this. So we're going to save this as a new name here, and we'll put a 1 on the end of it. But we're going to save it to the cloud, and you'll notice if I save it to my computer, I can actually save the file for this application. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you within PowerApps. I'm going to go back, and we're going to run this, and we can see this in the screen here. We can look at the various things here and react to them in the web interface. But we're going to show you this on my phone. Now you can't see me clicking, so bear with me on the things that are here. And you'll notice that I can't that although I'm refreshing it, I don't get it right away. So that's part of the delay in the cloud and being able to get that app down. But the good part about it is in the cloud, and you'll notice that all of these apps are cloud-based, right? So what happens is yesterday my phone died. Of course, I'm having a demo today, so my phone dies yesterday. So I had to go out and get a new phone last night. Well, it didn't interfere at all with my ability to get into this. So let's actually go into the app on the phone and show you what it looks like on the phone. And we'll open this up, and of course it gave us errors. So let's close that app and go back. Again, it wouldn't be a demo if it didn't crash on me. So we're going to close PowerApps and then reopen it. Let's reopen PowerApps. Where's that? Let's see. There we go. I'm going to reopen PowerApps. And again, it's not the issue is with Google Drive, not necessarily with the app at this point. We're going to open the other version of this to see if everything works out as expected. So, well, of course not. But we'll go back to viewing it on in the PowerApps. So you can see basically how it works. It has different screens. We can do this through the phone, and it probably does have to do with the fact that I haven't updated the apps on the other. Now, so this is creating a phone app. As you saw, there's also the ability to create tablet apps. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier was an expense app. And this expense app was built and is still kind of in process. One of the things that we want to do about this expense app is to be able to allow people to post their documents, their expense documents, like receipts and so forth, into these expenses. So that's one area that we'll be doing additional information on. So, and one of the things that with PowerApps that's very good is that you can do different dynamic fields and so forth based on the selections. So we can do that as well, and as well you can filter for the user and what the user has actually, who the user is. So all of those are that's kind of a quick demo of what's available in PowerApps. Let's try going back to the screencast again and see if we can. Yeah, there we go. So so if we go into into this, you can see as we click through the different screens, we can then change information based on what we want to input. Well, and the key here is that you can get to this mobily, and it can interact with both flows and with SharePoint as well as your SQL data. And there's some pretty nice applications out there that you can take advantage of. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark Quickle.
Okay, great. And let me just try to address a few of the questions that came in here. So one was, are PowerApps and Flow available in the government GCC tenants? And the answer to that at present is no, they are not, and neither is Logic Apps in Azure available at this point either. So we would have to look at one of the other Azure workloads to try to handle that automation piece. We should be hearing something actually very soon on that. So keep your ears open on that one. Can PowerApps use all features of a given device, or is it limited to a smaller subset? And so for PowerApps, you can take advantage of the camera, you can take advantage of location services, touch, and on the camera you can read barcodes and that type of thing. So there are a certain subset of capabilities that are available to you, but if you watch the changelog, you will get an idea that they are looking for new things, or you could go open a user voice if you're looking to get another type of capability potentially for your phone. The next question, and maybe, I don't know, Dean, if you want to address it, if not, I certainly can. Flow being cloud-based, is there an option to install it locally to work offline? Was the other question.
In Flow, at this point, no, there is not an application like there is in PowerApps to create flows offline. PowerApps, you can create PowerApps offline, but there's a smaller subset of things that it allows you to do without being fully connected.
Okay, so yeah, in summary, PowerApps does have a client, desktop client, Windows 10 client that you can download and from the Windows Store and use, but not for Flow. Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. If you do have any further questions, my personal email is actually on the slide here now. You're welcome to email me any questions that you have, and I can forward that to our team here and make sure that we address it. Our main website's there, as well as our 365 support site as well. So thank you again, and have a delightful afternoon.